Chapter 4: How Unconditional Love Works for Relationships. When you consider we're all connected on a quantum level, and that the electromagnetic activity of our hearts affects the world around us, it's not a stretch to understand that this activity also affects the people around us. The vibrations of the heart expand as far as science has been able to measure, which is several feet. This means, of course, that you are constantly overlapping with other people, and your heart vibrations are therefore interacting with theirs. We know that what we say is only a fraction of our communication with others. We know that both tone of voice and body language have a much more powerful effect and convey far more information than our words communicate. And we know that all of this is mostly registered by the other person's subconscious. However, beyond body language is the energetic communication. Our energy is interacting with those around us regardless of what we're saying and doing. Now, because all of this is under the radar, undetectable to the conscious mind, we're unaware it's going on, but it's still having an effect. Have you ever felt something about someone and called it a hunch? Have you ever felt positive or negative feelings about someone you've only just met, with no logical explanation for these feelings? We affect each other just as we affect everything else in our world around us, on an unseen energetic level, according to how we're vibrating, which is indicated by how we're feeling. Of course, different feelings will create different vibrations, which will have varying results. As you can imagine, unconditional love is the most powerful positive energy that exists. If how we feel affects the results we get in life, imagine the effect of the power of unconditional love. The exercises and techniques I'll share with you later in this book will help you to develop your power to the point where you will be able to completely change your experience with difficult and negative people. You'll be able to aim your power at a negative or difficult person by conjuring up, using the techniques I'll teach you, unconditional love for them. You'll be able to feel love for them regardless of what they do or say. You'll be able to do this right in the middle of feeling annoyed, hurt, angry, or frustrated. And you'll be able to sustain it, to stay tuned in. The results will astound you. When I first discovered the potency of using the power of unconditional love in this way, I used it on a person I was having a very difficult time with. This was about 8 years ago, when I was still right in the beginning rather, of my superpower discovery. That particular person had been spiteful and mean and had done some terrible things, including lying in court. I didn't know how I was ever going to be able to forgive her or even speak to her again. There was so much hurt and damage. I decided to use my superpower to test if it would work in a situation like this. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't expect it to work on the other person at all. I was doing it simply to change my own perspective so that I could get past the pain. First, I chose to see this person as a spiritual being who was playing the role of a baddie in the story of my life. And at first, even though I couldn't forgive her, I could start by at least appreciating her performance. So this spiritual being was doing a brilliant job of playing the baddie. Very convincing, excellent performance. From there, I managed to move on to conjuring up the power of unconditional love. 2 weeks later, completely out of the blue, I received a phone call from this person spontaneously apologizing for everything she'd done. This was completely unsolicited and totally out of character for her. I was stunned. I remember being speechless, but thrilled, of course. Since that event, although I now have very few experiences with negative or mean people myself, I have helped others transform relationships using the power of unconditional love. Margaret's story. a true story with names changed to protect privacy. I had been working with Margaret for a few months, and she'd achieved impressive improvements in her energy levels. She was finding it easier to get up in the morning and wasn't fading in the afternoon as she had before. However, something very dramatic had just happened, and Margaret called me in a state. She had been called into her boss's office and told that there was a discrepancy in the accounts. The bottom line is that Margaret had been accused of stealing from the company. She was horrified and devastated, and she was also furious that anyone could believe that she was capable of stealing from anyone. In addition, she was furious that she'd been accused before a proper investigation had been carried out. Although Margaret could not get past the feelings of anger and horror in that moment, we went through the beginner's exercise and superpower exercise together until her state had changed enough for her to be able to fill herself with her power and maintain it. Then she sent the power to her boss, the company, and the entire situation. Even if she was never proved innocent, even if they believed she was guilty, and even if she was fired because of it, she loved herself anyway, the company, the people involved, and the situation itself. I suggested that Margaret keep herself tuned in as much as possible and resist the temptation to get into the emotion of the injustice of the issue. There's often a very powerful pull in circumstances like this to get into the feeling of the injustice and to soak in it. It's a human reaction and perfectly natural, but destructive. It's important to become aware of this and to pull away from it. Using the beginner's exercise and the superpower exercise helps. As I explained to Margaret, when you feel yourself being pulled into that emotional quagmire of feelings of anger and injustice, it's like being stuck in a literal quagmire, and your superpower is the lifeline that can help you get out of it. If you stay in the emotion of injustice, you'll be stuck there, and it will only create more of the same. Making the effort to resist the pull of that quagmire, grab the lifeline of your superpower, and determine to hang on no matter what, will mean you get out of that state quickly, and the results are like magic. Margaret had already seen significant results from using her superpower, and so she trusted it enough to resist the urge to dwell on the injustice. And instead, she kept going through the exercises to keep herself in the state of unconditional love. She made sure that she loved it all regardless of how it turned out. It was only a couple of hours later that Margaret called me back, beside herself with excitement. She'd just received a call from her boss at home, apologizing profusely and explaining that there'd been an error. Someone else had in fact made the error, and Margaret had done nothing wrong. Her boss went on to say that since Margaret's performance had been particularly impressive lately, she was putting her in charge of a new project. The project was one Margaret had been desperate to get involved in, and she was ecstatic. It was also going to mean an opportunity for an increase in her bonus if she was able to make a success of this particular project. If Margaret had allowed herself to get pulled into the feelings of injustice, she would probably have dwelled on how unfair the situation was. She would undoubtedly have confided in friends and colleagues about how badly she was being treated, and how dare her boss accuse her of stealing, and so on. Not only would the energy she was putting out have been entirely different, but her behavior, the way she spoke, and the decision she made would have been affected. Instead, she shone light into the darkness of false accusation, diffusing it. Where there may have been no way to prove her innocence, she didn't even have to. That was taken care of for her, without her even needing to try. On top of that, her energy of unconditional love affected her boss on an unseen level, drawing attention to her value and resulting in Margaret being given an opportunity she'd been wanting for a while, but didn't think she would be given. No matter how bad the situation or people are, your power will work. No matter how dark it is, your power will transform that darkness to light. But you have to switch it on. Marriage and other romantic relationships. There have been several instances of exes who transformed after being filled with the power of unconditional love. Here's one person's story. Although Jackie is happy for her story to be told to inspire others, she asked for names to be changed. Jackie and Mike had been married for 12 years when they finally divorced. It was dramatic and traumatic for everyone involved, especially their son, who was 7 years old at the time. When Jackie first started writing to me, she was frustrated, hurt, and angry about not only the fact that Mike had left her for another woman, but also the way he was behaving throughout the process of the divorce. Mike seemed to not care that he devastated the lives of his wife and son, and seemed to be focused only on his new life. He was dragging his feet in the divorce proceedings and barely made contact with his son. In her first email to me, Jackie explained that she couldn't see how she could ever even think about forgiving Mike, never mind feeling anything remotely related to unconditional love for him. The damage was just too deep and his behavior beyond any reason. It took some time for Jackie to begin to use her superpower on the situation. I guided her through developing the skill to fill just herself with it first. In circumstances like this, where there's a lot of hurt and anger, it's important to focus only on filling yourself with the power without sending it anywhere. In fact, while I'm here, I'll let you into a secret. The truth is, you don't actually need to send the love anywhere. You don't need to aim your superpower at what you want to change. All you really need to do in order to see results in any area of your life and for any issue is to fill yourself with that power and maintain it. Keep yourself topped up with it. That is the most important part of the process, and it works on its own. The reason we aim it at targets is for the benefit of the conscious mind. The conscious mind can comprehend aiming and shooting the power at targets in order to affect them, just as you would with magic wand or a superhero power, better than it can accept that simply keeping yourself full of that power will affect everything else in your life. So we use the method of aiming and filling people, things, and situations with the power, since it does result in faster and more effective changes because the conscious mind is able to accept it more readily. Back to Jackie. Because of the intense emotions Jackie was experiencing through this extremely challenging experience, not only was she unable at that point to send unconditional love to Mike, she was also unable to feel much of it for herself. In fact, she was running on empty as far as her superpower was concerned. Since you can't give what you don't have, it's essential that you only aim your power at targets once you're full of it yourself. I suggested that Jackie focus solely on filling herself with her power using the beginner's exercise and then moving on to the superpower exercise without the steps that involve allowing the power to overflow. I suggested she stop at the point where she's full of the power and then practice maintaining that state for as long as possible. Of course, at first she found it difficult to tune in at all, but she was determined to create the changes she wanted in her life, and so she practiced consistently. She found that she was able to tune in easier each time she practiced, and her ability to maintain the state improved. She was able to hold the feeling of unconditional love for herself for longer and longer periods. The next step I gave Jackie was to learn to tune in to her power using a power phrase. This enabled her to turn her power on instantly without needing to go through the exercises. With this new skill, she was able to keep herself topped up with her power throughout her day in the middle of any situation, regardless of where she was or what she was doing. It had been about a week since Jackie first wrote to me, and she'd been practicing using her power every day, several times a day, as she wanted to master her skill to the point where she could use it to make changes as soon as possible. Toward the end of that week, she'd already seen a few small changes in various areas of her life. These ranged from feeling more energized, less stressed, and happier than she had been before, to little coincidences and synchronicities. After that first week, Jackie was able to feel that she was full of her superpower most of the time, and it was now time to start practicing aiming it at targets. I suggested she start with small things first, working her way up to the situation with Mike. She started with traffic and an unfriendly cashier in her bank and found it really easy. There'd been a few incidents involving Mike during that first week that had frustrated and angered her, including Mike forgetting to fetch their son from school. Jackie had reacted with fury and bitterness at the time, but was able to later tune in and fill herself with her power. Now it was time to aim her superpower at him, and to fill him with the same unconditional love that filled her. She tuned into her power and filled herself with that unconditional love. Then she imagined her power overflowing from her and filling the room she was in. Next, she thought of Mike and imagined the power filling him, from his toes up to the top of his head. She found it much easier than she expected. She imagined him at his worst, and imagined that he would never change, and kept that power filling him. She was able to think of all the things he'd done and keep that power filling him, loving him anyway. She made sure she felt the feeling of loving him anyway, even if he never changed. Jackie wrote to me later to say that she couldn't get over how much easier it was than she had expected. The next step was to use her power whenever Mike said or did anything that upset or annoyed her. Right in the middle of whatever it was, she was to tune in to her power, feel it filling herself, and then see it filling him. Jackie managed to achieve this a couple of times, but there were one or two occasions when she just couldn't do it. When she wrote to me for advice on these instances, I suggested that she simply tune in whenever she can, after the incident, and then love the fact that she couldn't tune in. Love the fact that she couldn't feel the love. More about that powerful technique later. A few days later, she received a phone call from Mike, who was friendlier than usual. He sounded very upbeat and in good spirits. He told her that he was about to leave town for a week and that he'd signed the paperwork for the lawyer. And that he had signed the paperwork the lawyer was waiting for and would drop it off at the lawyer's office the next morning. He also asked if he could take their son on a day out. It was Thursday when he called. He would be leaving town on the Monday and wanted to take their son to a theme park on the Saturday. Although Jackie was pleasantly surprised, she said she was skeptical because of his previous broken promises. So she didn't tell her son about the trip and decided it would be a surprise if Mike did turn up, and if he didn't, she will have spared her son the disappointment. She received a call from the lawyer on Friday afternoon to say he'd received the signed paperwork from Mike. On Saturday, Jackie waited for Mike to arrive to fetch their son. He had promised to be there at 9 a.m. It was now 10:15 a.m., and Jackie was seething. She was glad she hadn't told their son about the outing. Then she remembered to use her superpower. She took a moment to try to feel her power, but found it difficult. So she went back to the beginner's exercise to get herself tuned in, and that worked instantly. Jackie filled herself with her power first, and then aimed it at Mike. She imagined that he had completely forgotten their son and kept him full of that power anyway. She imagined that he didn't care about her or their son and was too busy with his new romance to remember their son was waiting for him, and she loved him anyway. At 10:30 a.m., Mike called to say he was delayed but would be there in 15 minutes. He didn't say why he was delayed, and Jackie felt her relief mixed with anger. She went through the exercise again and made sure that she was filling Mike with her superpower even if he didn't have a good reason for being late, and even if he still didn't actually turn up at all, just in case. Mike arrived at 10:50 a.m., apologized briefly without an explanation, but was friendly and warm, aside to him she hadn't seen for a long time. Their son was ecstatic when his father turned up unexpectedly and told him they were going to the theme park. The relationship between Jackie and Mike is not perfect, and there are still things that Jackie finds difficult to accept. But the stress, drama, hurt, anger, and frustration are no longer a part of the relationship. They even have a laugh together occasionally. It's certainly a complete transformation from where it was. Jackie has gone on to use her superpower for many other aspects of her life and is now dating a man with whom she has a lot of fun and who gets on well with their son. Isabel's story. Names changed to protect privacy. Isabel had been single for some time when she sent me a message on a forum asking whether the superpower could work for finding a boyfriend. I suggested she start by using the superpower exercise to fill herself with the power first, and then I recommended she make a list of everything she wanted in a boyfriend, the qualities that were most important to her. The next step was to use the superpower exercise to tune in and then fill that list with the power, loving those qualities even if she never found anyone with them. She was to imagine that she would never find a boyfriend and aim her power at that outcome, like shining a light into darkness. I asked her to check that she was fully tuned into her power by making sure that she felt love for herself, even if she was never going to find a boyfriend, as well as for any other worst case scenario she thought of. In addition to this, I suggested Isabel follow what feels good in the moment, every moment. We're often led to what we want in the most unlikely ways. Over the next couple of weeks, Isabel wrote to me a couple of times feeling despondent. She'd been out on a couple of dates, but the guys she was meeting were nothing like the man she'd imagined being with. I reminded Isabel that she was still developing her skill and that it was crucial to keep going. Just like learning any new skill, it's important to keep practicing until you get the results you want, and consider any delays or setbacks as just part of the process of improving. In addition, I advised that Isabel not deliberately go out to try to meet guys, but instead to simply follow what feels good instead of what seems logical. Isabel persevered and began turning down social invitations when she didn't feel like going. Previously, she was accepting all invitations, whether she felt like going or not, assuming that she would never find her man otherwise. One of these occasions involved the birthday party of a friend of a friend of a friend. Isabel didn't know the birthday girl very well, having only met her a few times, but she'd agreed to go to the party when her friend Stacy pointed out that there would be lots of guys she hadn't met before, and maybe she would meet her dream man that night. However, the day before the party, her sister called her to say she had tickets for a show that she'd been wanting to see. Isabel later said that although she chose to see the show with her sister because that felt better, there was a small part of her that believed she should have gone to the party, as she might be missing meeting the man of her dreams there. As it happens, at the theatre, they bumped into an old friend of Isabel's sisters, who invited them both to join her and a group of friends for a drink after the show. Isabel had thought at the time that she might pop into the birthday party after the show, but it felt better to stay with her sister and go for a drink with the group. One of the guys in the group was a scuba diver teacher. He and Isabel got chatting, and when she mentioned she'd always wanted to try scuba diving, he invited her to attend one of the training sessions at the public swimming pool. To cut a long story short, it was at one of the diving classes that Isabel met her current boyfriend. By that time, she'd forgotten about the list she'd made of the qualities she wanted in a boyfriend. She remembered it sometime later, dug it out, and realized that she is with a man who has all of the qualities on her list. By practicing using her superpower and by following what felt good instead of what made sense, Isabel was led to her dream man. All along, I encouraged Isabel to use her superpower to love the outcome no matter what it may be, to keep herself topped up with unconditional love regardless of what may happen. And although she struggled at times, she kept practicing until it got easier. You can use your superpower for any kind of relationship, from those with family and friends, to spouses and partners, to clients, bosses, work colleagues, and strangers. It works from any distance, and it works even if you've never met the person. The most important thing to remember is that in order for it to work, you need to make sure that you are completely filled with your power yourself before you aim it at anyone else. I'll share with you later in this book exercises you can use to develop your ability and the process for using your power to transform your relationship with others. What about free will? Of course, one of the most common questions regarding the subject of changing other people's behavior using this power is the question of free will. How can we make someone else change their behavior or attitude without their cooperation? The truth is, we can't. No one can make someone else change against their will. What you're changing with this power is your experience of the other person, not necessarily the other person themselves. If that person is open to change, if they are open to it even just on a subconscious level, they may well change within themselves. However, if they are not open to change at all, since it is your experience of that person that you are changing, circumstances will adjust accordingly. Perhaps you will simply happen to not be around them when they are in that state or mood. Or something may occur that results in their leaving your experience altogether. They may be transferred or get another job, or you may receive a new promotion or job offer. As long as you are tuned into your power, have filled yourself with it first, and then aimed it at that person, your experience of that person will change in one way or another. It's important to remember that in order for this to work, you need to be fully tuned into your power. And in order to remain fully tuned in, you need to be feeling unconditional love. That means that you fill the other person with love even if they never change, even if the entire situation remains exactly as it is. Remember, the power is the unconditional. When you love something exactly as it is, you release it. You let it go. You let go of whatever is holding it in your experience.